Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James, broadcasting from the auxiliary radio station for Arkanasa Radio in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Here we are doing another podcast. Kind of spectacular since I thought I'd only do about 4 or 5 when I started this whole thing. Tonight's show is called Haunted Things 2. I did Haunted Things back in August 13th, 2018, so here's the second version. What causes a spirit to stay in some item? Why is one thing haunted while others are just things? The longer I look into the paranormal, the more questions I come up with. There are haunted ships, haunted cars, haunted houses, and haunted possessions. An item like a statue or an ancient relic associated with religious happenings might take on some power from being used and venerated over and over. Everyday things or items created by people recently have been known to possess spirits that have made people's lives interesting. There is a Cypriot fertility goddess from around 3500 BC, really unknown where it came from. They just know they found it, that has been causing havoc with its owners. The archaeologists think it is a fertility goddess, and they began calling it the Woman of Lem. To me, it looks kind of like a roasting chicken with a weird head. Take a look at it. It looks like a chicken. Lord Elfont bought the statuette during the British colonial occupation of Cyprus, sometime around the end of the 1800s. Within 6 years of purchasing the statuette, 6 members of his family, including the Lord, died under unexplained circumstances. The statuette was eventually bought by Ivor Menchusi. The entire family died within 3 years of the statuette arriving in their home. As everything they owned was being sold off, the statuette was purchased by Lord Thompson Noel. In 2 years, the entire family was dead. It looked as if each purchase of the statuette was causing death to come at an increasing rate. Of course, a lot of folks think they are too smart to believe in things like curses or haunted items. There's no way an evil spirit could be attached to such a small statuette. Sir Alan Beaverbrook bought the unusual-looking statue and took it to his house. Within the year, Sir Alan, his wife, and 2 daughters were dead. The 2 sons were spared from death for unknown reasons. Looking back on the history of the fertility goddess, which was now being called the Goddess of Death, the 2 sons decided it was indeed cursed and it needed to be locked away, preferably in someone else's care. They quickly shipped the small statue to the Royal Edinburgh Museum. They relinquished all claim to it, so hopefully the curse wouldn't come back and haunt them anymore. The museum accepted the Woman of Lem, and the curator did his research before placing it on display. He checked to be sure it was in good shape, and he also made sure that it was as old as they claimed. The stone relic was placed in a display case so visitors could check it out. Within the year from accepting the goddess of death, the curator was dead from unknown causes. The statuette is still owned and displayed by the Royal Edinburgh Museum, but it hasn't taken any more lives. Of course, then again, it's locked behind a solid glass box and nobody touches it. What can I say about slavery? A lot of folks are under the impression the United States, especially the South, invented slavery. I guess they never read the Bible, where it talks about the Jewish slaves in Egypt or all the other references about slaves. The first steam engine, the Aeolipile, invented in somewhere around 200 BC, was considered to be a horrible thing that would put slaves out of work. Slavery was a big deal in the South, but not everybody owned slaves. The Myrtle Plantation did have slaves, and a lot of them. Located in St. Francisville, Louisiana, is one of the better-known ghost-haunted places in America. The plantation was built in 1796 by General David Bradford on a 600-acre chunk of land that at one time had been a Tunica Indian burial ground. It had originally been named Laurel Grove. Bradford lived there alone for several years until President John Adams pardoned him for his role in the Pennsylvania Whiskey Rebellion in 1799. He then moved his wife Elizabeth and their 5 children to the plantation. On at least a few occasions, Bradford saw spirits wandering about his property. These looked to be Indians, a feather, not Dot. He wrote it off as being just his imagination, but he did mention to a few of his close friends how he had seen these odd spirits roaming about his land. The property was eventually passed on to his daughter Sarah and her husband, Judge Clark Woodruff, in 1820s. The Woodruffs had 3 children, Cornelia, Jane, and Mary. One of their slaves, named Chloe, was promoted to house slave to act as the governess for the Woodruff children. Field work was hard, back-breaking labor that never ended. Housework was a lot nicer and not nearly as hard on the body. Some say the judge was having his way with Chloe. This wasn't all that unusual back then. The custom of the time was never talk about nasty things. High society folks, especially women, ignored anything going on around them that was considered uncouth. The story could have been made up, or it could have been true. We may never know. If she was the judge's mistress, Chloe would have felt her status was safe and she would be able to remain in the house. Then again, if a new, better-looking slave were to arrive, Chloe could find herself back out in the fields. The slaves didn't have any rights. One story says the judge did have his eye on a better-looking younger slave. Others say the children were getting old enough they no longer needed a full-time caretaker. Whatever the reason, Chloe thought her days of working in the house were numbered. Being concerned about her future, Chloe would listen in on any conversations dealing with running the plantation, especially anything that had to do with the slaves. One day the judge caught her listening just outside the door. In a rage, he cut her ear off as a nasty way to remind her to not eavesdrop. This did more to convince Chloe she was on her way out the door and into the fields. To cover the hole where her ear used to be, Chloe began wearing a green turban. She needed a plan to stay on everyone's good side. In desperation, she came up with a plan. Not a good plan, but it was all she had. Cornelia was about to celebrate a birthday. Chloe baked a cake, into which she placed some poison. She crushed oleander leaves, boiled them, and used the water to make the cake. The plan was the family would all eat the poisoned cake and become very sick. Nobody would know what was causing the illness, and so it could and probably was going to be something fatal, as so many diseases were back then. Chloe would lead the way in taking care of everyone and nursing them all back to health. As if by magic, the whole family would recover. Everybody would credit Chloe with saving their lives, and she would spend the rest of her days as a house slave, avoiding that field work in the process. Well, the best laid plans, as they say. Chloe put too much poison in the cake. Then the judge and Mary didn't eat any, so this left more for the others, who finished it off. Things went downhill from there. Sarah, Cornelia, and Jane were bedridden and slowly dying. Chloe was there trying to nurse them back, but it was a lost cause. Fortunately for her, nobody suspected there was anything wrong with the cake. People got sick and died from all kinds of illnesses. In some places it was considered vital to cover any and all mirrors in a house when someone died. This was to prevent the soul from getting trapped in the mirror, thinking it was the tunnel leading to heaven or the afterlife. As death drew near, the servants, well, slaves, depending, would rush about the house covering all the mirrors. In some of the bigger, fancier houses, there could be several dozen mirrors. They were status symbols. The grand dining room had been locked soon after the deadly birthday party. As the slaves moved about the house covering the mirrors, they never covered the one in the dining room. Feeling pretty bad about what she had done, Chloe told one of the other slaves. This slave passed the story on to the others. Soon, most of the slaves on the plantation knew why the mother and 2 kids had died. They got to worrying. If the judge found out about the evil deed done by Chloe, he might just take his anger out on everyone. There could be several more deaths in the future, maybe all of them. One of the slave foremen went to the judge with the story. Let's just say the judge wasn't very happy. He took Chloe out to a tree and hung her. Once she was very dead, her body was dragged down to the river. Heavy rocks were tied to her, and she was thrown into the water. It wasn't long after that people began seeing a shadowy figure moving about the plantation. It was always seen wearing a green turban. Was Chloe now a ghost because of her deadly act, or was it something to do with the land? The Indian burial ground had already produced ghosts in the past years. Now the haunted item was the mirror. That one mirror the slaves had missed because of became the new home of Sarah, Cornelia, and Jane. People would see what looked like a woman and 2 children in the reflection. These images were all dressed in the 1800s style clothing. Folks began seeing a 4th image. This one was darker and not as well dressed. She had on a green turban. The superstition about mirrors say they must be covered for several days after a death. The mirror had not only been uncovered while Sarah and her children died, but also when Chloe was hung. She seems to be trapped in the mirror along with her victims. Mirrors have always had a bizarre quality to them. If you gaze into one at just the right angle, you just might see something behind you, something you might not want to see. This is called scrying. It's an old ghost hunting technique. If you ever want to do a ghost hunt and you don't have an EMF and a thermometer and all the thermal gear and the fancy equipment, just get a mirror and hold it at an angle and look around the room to see what you're not seeing. The story of the Okiku Nigoyo, a Nigoyo means a human-shaped doll, began in 1918. A young man named Akichi Suzuki was visiting Sapporo, Japan, and he saw a doll in a shop window that he thought would be the perfect gift for his 2-year-old sister Okiku. I'm getting her mixed up with the professor. The doll was just under 16 inches tall, and it was dressed in a traditional Japanese kimono with just about shoulder-length hair. When Aikichi returned home, he presented the doll to his sister, and it quickly became her constant companion. If the doll was not in Okiku's possession, it was always nearby, and it was never out of her sight. Some of y'all know why I hate dolls. For the new listeners, it's something that happened back when I was about 12 years old. We were watching all kinds of spooky shows. There weren't many, but we watched any that were on. The Night Gallery had an episode about a doll that killed people. It was scary, but we knew it was TV. We were camping out in the backyard, and around midnight, we saw a pair of shoes just under the tent flap. Somebody was standing there right outside the tent, and, well, tents don't have locks on them. There was no way anybody could have gotten into the backyard without making quite a bit of noise. The gate creaked really bad, and the fence would make noise if you clomb over it. We never found out who was standing there for quite some time that night. Combined with that doll show, it kind of burned into my mind, so now I hate dolls, especially the ones that look real. I'm not going to talk about that demon baby that Ishmael has locked in that plexiglass box. That's another story. The little girl loved the doll so much, she named it after herself. In 1919, Okiku became ill and passed away with a high fever when she was just 3. The original plan for the doll was to bury it with the young girl, but that didn't happen. Instead, the doll was placed on a small altar in the Suzuki home, kind of as a remembrance for their passed-on daughter. Have you ever noticed the grass growing? You don't. Just one day you look outside and it's oh, I need to mow the grass. One day it's fine, and the next it's long. The family noticed the doll looked different. It was the kind of thing they had to think about before realizing what was happening. When the doll was new, it had hair down to just below its jawline. This was called the Okappa hairstyle. As the family was looking at the doll, they noticed that it looked different. It took some time before the family could agree on this change. Somebody would say something and the others would try to convince them they were mistaken. Once they realized what was different, the family began looking closer at the doll. The hair was down past the shoulders. Cameras were a luxury back then, so nobody took any pictures to compare month to month, but they all said the hair was growing. After some time, the hair was down to 10 inches long. Since the doll was only 16 inches tall, the hair was quite noticeable by this time. The Suzuki family believed that the spirit of Okiku was now in the doll. They kept the doll in the home for the next 20 years. In 1938, Kikuko's family decided to move to Hokkaido. Instead of taking their daughter's doll with them, they agreed that it would be best to remain on the island. The doll was taken to the Meningi Temple, where it remains to this day. The monks that care for the Okiku doll occasionally trim and style the hair. One of the priests said that it came to him in a dream. The doll had said it wanted her hair cut. A study showed that the hair was human. It is still growing today, and many people visit the doll to honor its abilities. There's a ceremony held once a year as the priests give the doll a haircut. People come from all over Japan and a few from around the world to watch as the doll gets its hair trimmed. I will never visit that doll. I'm afraid it might follow me home. The photograph Bill Stoneham's parents took of him when he was 5 years old wasn't considered to be worth much until later in his life. At the time, Stoneham's family was in the advertising, and he traveled a lot. The family would stay with his grandmother in Chicago so they could save a little money. The place was so small that Stoneham was forced to sleep on a mat in a closet filled with dresses, coats, and hats. He said it wasn't like having a room. It was like being an item of clothing. I've had some small rooms in my time, but never a closet. Kids being kids, Stoneham played with one of the girls from the neighborhood. One day while the two were together, his parents had both kids pose in front of a glass door for a photograph. Just about every kid has gone through this. Stand in one place and look happy while somebody focuses the camera and takes a photo. Back then it was a lot bigger of a deal, and you had to wait to see what the image looked like. Stoneham went on to become an artist. In 1974, he used the photograph as a template for one of his creations. Instead of a young girl standing next to him, Stoneham painted a life-sized doll or a mannequin. The eye sockets are empty, and the face looks dead. At all of the joints are lines that look like what you would find on an old-style doll, anywhere where the arms and legs were articulated. The boy is standing with his back to a glass door. Through the panes of glass you can see hands reaching out as if trying to grab him. A very creepy-looking painting. The painting was named The Hands That Resist Him. If you want to take a look, just search for that name and be prepared for a very creepy sight. The Hands That Resist Him. The question I came up with is, were the hands trying to grab him or keep him outside? Since Stoneham finished the work, 3 people associated with it have died. Countless followers on the internet are convinced the painting and replicas of it are haunted. One man wrote, "I actually purchased a print of this painting from his website. I put it on display in my living room, and man, that thing made everyone who saw it uncomfortable. People actually stopped coming over because of it. I ended up taking it down due to popular demand, and now it's under a cloth in my apartment." This is the story of how The Hands Resist Him went from a photograph of an innocent childhood moment to an image that haunts the internet. The hands were all of the possibilities, Stoneham explained. You're left with the question, are these disembodied hands? Are they dismembered, floating there in space, or are they connected to bodies? Stoneham wrapped up his contract in 1974 with a large gallery show put on by Fennegarten. There, The Hands Resist Him was purchased by actor John Marley. Even if you never saw the movie The Godfather, you must know the scene. A man wakes up, finds a dead horse's head in bed with him. The man in bed was John Marley. Between 1978 and 1984, 3 of the men closest to The Hands Resist Him died. Seldes died in 1978, Fengarten in 1981, and Marley in 1984. The painting had been sold to a gallery just before Marley died. It was put on display in an art gallery that closed down, with all of the paintings still hanging on the walls. Somebody found the painting and took it home. Shortly after it was hung on the wall, the family put the painting on eBay with this description: "When we received this painting, we thought it was really good art. At the time, we wondered a little why a seemingly perfectly fine painting would be discarded like that. Today, we don't." One morning, our 4.5-year-old daughter claimed that the children in the painting were fighting and coming into the room during the night. The father of the young girl set up a motion-activated camera in her room so he could prove to his daughter there was nothing to be afraid of. Instead, he captured the doll girl holding a gun and forcing the boy to crawl out from the painting. Folks reading the description were drawn to the painting more as a curiosity than because they believed the story. Now, somebody would say, "Hey, you need to check out this picture. It's really creepy." And they would look at it, and then they would tell everybody else, "Oh yeah, you've got to see this painting. It's really creepy." The eBay listing was viewed more than 30,000 times. Some of these viewers even complained to the seller about experiencing supernatural occurrences after merely visiting the listing. One reported hearing an exorcist-type voice, along with being hit with a blast of hot air. Another reported that he became ill while viewing the painting, and he had to burn white sage to cleanse his house afterwards. One viewer said he blacked out right after seeing the painting. By the time the painting was sold to a gallery owner named Kim Smith for $1,025, its legend had spread across the internet. A month after the eBay auction ended, Smith spoke with a paranormal website about life after purchasing what had become known as the haunted eBay painting. Kim said aside from hundreds of emails on how to cleanse the gallery using sage or holy water, the painting hasn't done anything to anyone. I can walk through a haunted building and probably never see or hear anything. I'm not tuned to the right frequency. Now, I have seen some things I can't explain, but mostly my ghost hunting is dull and uninteresting. Other folks around me will hear and see things. The people seeing the painting at the gallery probably held expectations of something happening along the lines of the movie The Exorcist. Then again, the people who saw it and had strange happenings going on around them were probably more attuned to that sort of thing. They saw or felt things, whereas the people expecting something didn't. Today, the painting is kept out of sight in Smith's Gallery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Stoneham, now 67, still receives a handful of messages each week from people terrified by the haunted eBay painting. And on that happy note, I'm going to take a brief pause and play a couple commercials. So don't go away, we'll be right back. If your house is infested by ghosts, maybe it's time to contact somebody that can help you. Call the Laredo Paranormal Research Society and they'll come by and see if they can't do something about your uninvited guests. You can contact the LPRS at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. It's a bird. It's a plane. I need to get my eyes checked. Where am I going to get my eyes checked? Why, at Optica del Norte, 107 Calle del Norte, right across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Why would anybody go through life drinking bad coffee? It's like a disgrace. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, the best coffee on the planet. You can find them at 4501 McPherson. Or, if you don't live in Laredo, you can order at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. The absolute best coffee on the planet. It's time to take better care of your skin. After all, it is the biggest organ in your body. Contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019. Talk to her about a free skincare consultation. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And don't forget, Christmas is still coming. Yeah, it's quite a few months away, but why wait till the last minute to do your Christmas shopping? Books make good presents. They don't cost a whole lot, and they're easy to wrap. If you'd like to get some books, check out some of our local businesses. For example, the Phoenix Bookstore on Victoria Street. If you're not in Laredo, you can locate them at bookshop.org/shop/the Phoenix Bookstore. The origins of the Anguished Man are relatively unknown. The owner, Sean Robinson, received the oil painting from his grandmother, who had owned it for 25 years, as she'd kept it in her attic, believing it was evil. She once told Sean that she used to see dark figure of a man around the house at night. She also would hear strange noises and crying. When she passed the painting to him, she told him the story she had given when the painting was passed to her. The artist had used his own blood mixed in with the paint to create this work of art. Shortly after its completion, the artist committed suicide. There's no further details about him. My big question is, if she believed the painting was evil, why did she keep it? And why did she give it to her grandson? Maybe the painting had some kind of hold on her, which was then passed on to the next owner. Sean loved the painting. Well, his wife had other thoughts. Sean didn't want to get rid of it, so the painting was kept in the cellar. Members of his family began to see the dark figure of a man. They too heard noises, including crying and moaning. When heavy rain flooded the cellar, the painting, along with a number of other items, were moved to the parents' garage for safekeeping. Sean finally took the painting and hung it in the spare bedroom on the 3rd floor of his home. The strange noises were heard once again. Loud bangs, odd scraping sounds as though somebody were scratching fabric with their fingernails. Their dog that normally followed Sean everywhere would not go upstairs. Instead, it stood at the bottom, growling. Once the painting was moved upstairs, she refused to go to the top of the floor. The family would often hear crying and sobbing coming from somewhere in their home. They tried to explain it away, saying there was probably something outside making the sound. Try as they might, they still heard the sounds inside. As time went by, the sounds grew louder, making it impossible to ignore or explain away. One day, Sean saw a shadowy figure, realizing there might be more to this story than he was willing to admit. He'd been sleeping, and he woke suddenly to see this shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. He couldn't make out any details, but he could definitely see there was something standing there. The family began to notice cold spots around the house and often had the feeling of being watched. Sean reported feeling as though someone were standing directly behind him, whispering. One evening, Sean's wife went to bed early. She felt as if somebody had gotten into bed beside her, thinking it was Sean. When she turned around, she found herself staring into the eyes of a stranger. She began to scream, and when Sean got to her, she was unsure if she'd really seen it or if she'd just had a bad dream. Well, his wife wanted the painting gone. Sean wanted to keep the painting, even though all the things going on around the home. It sounds like his grandmother knowing something was wrong, but still wanting to keep the painting. In a compromise, the painting was moved back down to the cellar. He didn't want to believe the painting could possibly be haunted. It was just too much to accept. More out of desperation than curiosity, Sean began to record videos of the painting. He moved the painting into the upstairs bedroom and set his camera up to record. Over the course of the next 3 nights, he would record 8 hours each night. One thing he noticed right away was the noises the camera picked up. Most sounded like they were coming from outside, and they could be easily explained. However, there were a few that really stuck out. They sounded as if they were coming from inside the bedroom. There was a strange scraping sound, similar to the noise they had previously heard, as well as a loud bang, like something had fallen on the floor. When he looked around the room, he couldn't find anything was out of place. Footage from the second night showed the bedroom door suddenly swing shut. There was no evidence of any wind blowing, and there was no reason why the door would suddenly swing shut and slam. The painting remained in the bedroom for the next few weeks, and during that time, Sean's wife reported feeling somebody stroking her hair when she was in the bathroom. Sean also saw a strange fog-like mist at the top of the stairs. When he walked into the middle of it, he felt extreme cold. His vision got blurry, and he became very lightheaded. When the mist vanished, everything went back to normal. The longer the painting remained upstairs, the worse the feelings of anxiety and dread became. The family always felt as though they were being watched, and they also began to experience nightmares. They were having reoccurring dreams of a middle-aged man. Having the same dream, none of the family ever saw the face. Sean decided to set up the video camera once more. Over the course of the next 4 nights, he recorded several strange night light anomalies, which he was unable to explain away. The room had thick curtains, so there was no way light could come in from outside. Everybody was in bed. These anomalies were not like orbs or anything like that. They seemed to be moving around the face of the painting. One day Sean heard his son's footsteps coming down the stairs. Suddenly his son stumbled and fell down the last couple of steps. A quick check showed that his son was okay, but later he noticed his son was bothered by something, so he asked what was wrong. The boy said when he was walking down the stairs, it felt like somebody had pushed him. He tried to stop himself from falling, he said, but the force was way too strong. Still not wanting to attach all the weird occurrences to the painting, Sean moved it back to the cellar. Any time he was staying in a different location, he would take the painting with him. He tried to explain this as his appreciation of the artwork and not something more sinister. Everywhere he went, the strange sounds followed. When he was staying at his parents' home, along with the painting, his father fell down the stairs as well. Finally, Sean put the painting in storage. He only pulls it out when he's working with a couple of paranormal researchers. While filming at Chillingham Castle in Northumberland, a group of guests all experienced the unexplained. The room suddenly became icy cold. A large, dark figure appeared in the middle of the seance circle, and a large wooden bench banged on the floor, all on its own. When one of the researchers turned and asked the painting if it had caused the bench to bang on the floor, the bench suddenly flipped upside down. It has been suggested that since the artist used his own blood to mix with paint, the restless spirit of the artist could be haunting it, while others believe it could be some sort of demonic attachment. Regardless of what it is, Sean is not willing to destroy or give up his painting. He intends to continue to search for the artist and see if he can figure out what is really behind the anguished man. A painting at the University of London in Royal Holloway has been linked to several suicides and many bad grades. The painting shows two polar bears ripping up the remains of some unseen creature laying under a torn-down structure. If you look closely, you'll get the impression they're eating somebody. The painting is from an artist, Edward Henry Landseer, who painted it in 1864. It is called Man Proposes, God Disposes. Yes, you can find that one on the internet as well. The painting depicts an imagined Arctic scene in the aftermath of Sir John Franklin's expedition in 1845 to explore the Northwest Passage. One student who sat staring at the painting while trying to take a test wound up writing, "The polar bears made me do it," on his test paper before leaving, going back to his room, and committing suicide. Another student plunged a pencil through his eye and into his brain, dying where he sat. The staff noticed the painting was directly in front of the desk that the student had been occupying. After years of having odd outcomes during tests, the college staff began to suspect there just might be a connection between failing grades and the painting. They began to notice any student sitting in a position where they could see the painting would fail their tests. After years of having students with good grades suddenly unable to pass a test, the staff came up with a solution. During tests, the painting is covered. This seems to work. Since initiating this policy, there have been no unexplainable failures. What could possibly be going on with this painting? The artist was known for his unnerving artwork. He had several other paintings of less than friendly subjects. Many show people either at the point of death or shortly after. His colors were always very dark, even when depicting a nice sunny day. None of the other paintings have any kind of odd reputation. just the polar bears eating an explorer. Madame Marie Delphine Lalaurie is most often referred to as the most evil woman of all time. Some say she was the devil himself hiding behind a pretty face. The secrets that were locked away in her mansion's attic were so evil and vile they have inspired centuries of ghost stories, crime novels, and even a character in American Horror Story. Delphine was born to an influential Creole family and was raised with the much finer things life had to offer. A Creole is a person of mixed European and black descent, especially in the Caribbean. Delphine married 3 times. First to a Spanish diplomat who died unexpectedly. Her second husband was a prominent banker who also died unexpectedly. Delphine then married the only dentist in town, Dr. Leonard Louis Nicolas Lalaurie. Delphine was a very wealthy woman, what with her inheriting all her first 2 husbands' wealth, as well as all the possessions and property of her parents. In 1831, Delphine purchased a property at 114 Rue Royale in New Orleans. The Lalauries hosted many balls and dinner parties. They were in the top of the in crowd in New Orleans. Being rich, Southern high society folks, they owned many slaves. The polite title was servants, but they owned them, so they were slaves. It was not uncommon for black folks to own slaves. It was considered normal at the time. To maintain a huge house and property, there had to be somebody doing all the grunt work. Delphine sure wasn't about to do the dishes or scrub the floors. She was rich, so she bought others to maintain her property. She ruled her house with an iron fist. People visiting the Lalauries on occasion witnessed these less than genteel actions. Some high society folks had 2 faces. The smiling, friendly face welcoming people into their home, and the dark, nasty face reserved for when the party was over. Delphine would slip once in a while and allow her dark side to show in public. Should some servant slave spill a drink or knock over a vase, Delphine would launch into one of her abusive assaults. Polite society insisted nobody was supposed to notice these outbursts. Rumors started to spread that Lalauries were mistreating their servants, and it was later stated that her servants' haggard and wretched appearance did not go unnoticed. It's one of those things, everybody saw it, but nobody talked about it. April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in the kitchen of the Lalaurie residence. It wasn't until after the event that it was revealed that it had been the household cook who had started the fire. The slave had been chained to the wall near the stove. She was the cook, so she was not allowed to leave her station. The slave decided it was better to die in a fire than to continue living the way she was being treated. The flames spread quickly, attracting the attention of bystanders. Locals rushed to assist the Lalauries. Delphine was busy grabbing any valuables and hustling them out to the street. As those helping out became aware, none of the house slaves were anywhere to be seen. When asked, there was no answer. Once the valuables were safe, Delphine no longer was concerned with anything or anyone still in the house. Her neighbors wanted to know where all the folks who had been doing all the chores around the house were. When no answers were given, the neighbors went in looking for the slaves. They found them in a locked room in the attic. Most were chained to the walls. 2 of them were dead. All of these people showed signs of abuse. The slaves were all taken to the local sheriff for questioning as to what the Lalauries had been up to. During all the confusion, Delphine and her husband slipped away. The official story says they made their way to Lake Pontchartrain and from there found passage to Paris. Some of the stories coming out were hard to believe. The slaves said Delphine, and sometimes her husband, were sadists. They enjoyed causing the slaves all manner of pain. The doctor was supposed to have been conducting experiments on them, trying to create some kind of a new life form, cutting parts off one and putting them on another. Many will say these stories were made up to make Delphine and her husband look bad. Others say they didn't need any help looking bad. I've read several books on the exploits of these two, and I believe that many, if not all, were true. They may have been exaggerated a lot, but the stories were probably based on actual occurrences. The house on Rue Royale was gutted by the fire? The house on Rue Royale was gutted by the fire. What was left was considered tainted. One story says the entire building was demolished. If this were true, then the building that took its place was built to look exactly the same. In the 1970s, the building was remodeled into luxury apartments. In 1997, the owner asked a local artist to create a portrait of the building's previous owner, that being Delphine Lalaurie. The painting was hung from one of the walls inside the building. Soon, things began to happen. People reported hearing echoing faint voices, feeling cold touch, and they had the strong smell of smoke. Possessions would be moved or suddenly vanish. One female tenant of the apartment said the painting whispered to her directly, and the sounds of footsteps followed her around her apartment. None of these sounds or smells had been reported until the painting was unveiled. The painting was seen to swing back and forth on the wall up to the point that it would fall from its mount. Many people said they felt uneasy if they stood close to the painting. It got so bad the owner of the property sent the painting back to the artist with a request he never return it. Eventually, the artist sold the painting to an unnamed client. The portrait is now in a private collection. The new owner refuses to discuss where it is located or whether there have been any unexplained occurrences since he bought it. Alton Towers in Staffordshire, England, is a theme park. Folks go there to enjoy the day and ride the rides. One ride is called the Hex. It is based on a tree found inside the park. If you look at the tree, you'll see chains wrapped around many of its branches. This tree is called the Old Oak. The ground around it was cleared and landscaped about 200 years ago. There are stone steps leading up to the trunk. The chains look as if they've been there a long time, like 200 years. Late one autumn night in 1821, the Earl of Shrewsbury was returning to his home, Alton Towers, when an old woman appeared in the road. The coach stopped to find out why she was there, and the woman begged the Earl for some money. Just like today around any overpass in most cities. I doubt she had a cardboard sign, but she was haggard and pretty bad looking. The Earl dismissed her, telling the old woman to get off his property. The old woman placed a curse on him, saying, "For every branch on the old oak tree that falls, a member of the Earl's family will die." Well, the Earl dismissed her and carried on his way. That night, a storm came up, and a single branch from the old oak tree broke and fell. The same night, the son of the Earl suddenly and mysteriously died. The next morning, the Earl ordered his servants to chain every branch together to prevent any more from falling. The tree was wrapped in chains so none of the branches could fall to the ground. The chained oak, lying as it does in Barbary Gutter, did indeed once sit next to an old carriageway that once wound its way from Alton Abbey, which is later known as Alton Towers, to the local church. The naysayers tell a different story. They say the chains were put on the tree to keep it looking beautiful, as if a tree wrapped in chains would look like anything other than a cursed tree. It is also the only tree with chains wrapped around it, now known as simply the Old Oak. The Ryde Hex is reported to be one of the most active areas when it comes to ghost sightings. The Ryde is located in the mansion's old armory and picture gallery. People that line up for the ride have reported seeing children dressed in Victorian clothing walking around the edges of the line. On occasion, they've been pelted with small objects and tiny stones. In the main area of Alton Towers, people report the presence of a large shadow man around the music room. Often, they hear his footsteps. The footsteps have also been heard around the banquet hall. The most common paranormal occurrence is the sighting of a lady in a long dark dress strolling through the corridors of the house. When she's seen, you often smell the strong aroma of perfume. She apparently takes on a very lifelike appearance, with one member of the staff believing her to be a guest who was in the park after hours. The staff member told the woman she wasn't allowed in here and needed to leave. The woman did as she was asked, but she slowly faded away, much to the fright of the staff member. Alton Towers is right next to Alton Castle. They were owned by the same family, but today they are no longer connected. If you go to the theme park, don't wander over to the castle. It's off limits. Since 1442, the castle was in the possession of the Earls of Shrewsbury, who from the beginning of the 19th century made their home at nearby Alton Towers. By the mid-19th century, the castle was mostly in ruins. John Talbot, the 16th Earl of Shrewsbury, commissioned architect Augustus Pugin, who was already working for the Earl at Alton Towers, to construct a new Gothic castle on the site. Most of the 12th century ruins were demolished to make way for the new building, which was designed to look like a French or German medieval castle. The Earl also commissioned Pugin to develop the surrounding area on Castle Hill. The castle had once been a boarding school, which closed in 1996. It was then converted by the Archdiocese of Birmingham as a Catholic youth retreat center. The center is only open to staff and family of the kids living there. Why is it one item will hold a spirit or a ghost while another is just an old thing? Some will say it has to do with whether or not some violent act took place involving the item, causing it to become fused with some entity. I like to think there's something to do with a person's intentions who placed some kind of a spirit into the item. The painting of the polar bears might have taken on its bizarre ability to fail students when the first two students had their deaths, one blaming the painting for their suicide while the other was facing it when using that pencil in a bad way. As for the painting using blood mixed with paint, there are some things you just can't explain and should try to avoid. Lowry's painting could have drawn her ghost back to her former home. It is said she really loved that house in New Orleans. There's no telling what kind of a ritual might have been involved back when the goddess of death was carved. It might not be a fertility symbol. It could have been used to honor some nasty demon. Really old things like that could be connected to just about anything. Some artists really put themselves into their paintings. By focusing on their work for days, weeks, even years, the inner spirit of the artist, his or her inner demons, might be transferred to the canvas. My father-in-law died in our house. None of the mirrors were covered at the time. We still have the same mirrors mounted in both bathrooms. I've never seen him in the glass. If I did see him, I'd simply say howdy and ask him if there was anything he wanted to tell his daughter or my wife. Some kids will pour their heart into their toys. If there's just one toy, it will get the entire focus. A doll with human hair that grows is odd, but not really scary. Still, the idea of any kid's toy becoming something other than a toy is wrong. Kids' toys should be played with and not feared. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. Let them know what they're missing. If you've got a story, something you believe is true, and you'd like to see it in print someday, you can send it to me at strangethings@arkanasa.com, and I'll put it into readable form. I'll send you back the draft so you can look it over and make sure that what I'm writing is what you're saying. And hopefully before the end of this year, I'll put out another book. As of yet, I don't have a title for it. I keep changing the name because the stories keep changing. Well, until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?